the Martinsyde F3, F4, and F4A. In the spring of 1917, the Martinsyde Company were considering the design of a new single-seat fighter powered by the 230 horsepower BHP engine. It appears that the design in this form got no further than the project stage, for the next Martinsyde single-seat fighter to emerge was the F3. It appeared in the autumn of 1917 as a substantial, handsome, single-seat fighter powered by what was described as an experimental Rolls-Royce Falcon engine of 285 horsepower. And in its design was incorporated all that had been learned from its predecessors. It was built as a private venture, and the prototype existed for some time without any identifying serial number. But when the system of official licenses for the construction of private venture aircraft was introduced in 1917, the serial number X2 was allotted to the Martinsyde F3 prototype. The F3 was designed by G.H. Martinsyde. Its airframe was built from the conventional wood, wire, and fabric of the period, but its structure incorporated several unusual features. The longerons of the forward fuselage were of hickory. Those in the rear portion of the fuselage were of spruce, as were all the spacers. The forward portion of the fuselage had diagonal spruce members instead of cross-bracing and was covered with plywood. The rear portion was cross-braced with two BA swaged tie rods and was fabric-covered. To the basic girder component, an unusually deep top decking was added. In front of the cockpit, it provided ample space to house the main fuel tanks and two Vickers guns. Aft, it acted as a streamlined headrest for the pilot. The spars of the lower center section were bolted to the underside of the lower longerons and were fared to the fuselage. Each spar of the main planes was built up of 3 laminations of spruce. The wings were of equal chord, but the lower was slightly shorter in span than the upper. On the upper surface of each wing, a nose covering of 1/16-inch plywood from the leading edge to the depth of 12 millimeters behind the front spar was applied. This, and the unusually close spacing of the ribs, ensured the accurate preservation of the airfoil section. The disposition of the flying wires was unusual, and there were auxiliary mid-bay flying wires, as on the SE-5. The profiles of all tail surfaces were of spruce, and were remarkable for their large cross-sections. The stern post was a duralumin tube, and the incidence of the tailplane could be altered in flight. Armament originally consisted of 2 fixed Vickers guns in the fuselage. It seems that the first official trials of the prototype were flown by a Royal Flying Corps captain at Brooklands on 3rd October 1917. Apart from minor criticisms relating to the metal fitting securing the tailplane strut, the need for toe clips under the rudder bar, and a suggestion that the tailplane adjusting wheel should be larger and should have a higher gear ratio, the only substantial point of criticism was that the pilot's downward view was not good. This led to an official request to Martinsyde's to provide apertures in the roots of the lower wings. But the firm declined to make these, protesting that such cutouts would impair the aircraft's performance, which was exceptionally good. Official interest in the design was sufficient for 6 further prototypes to be ordered under contract. These aircraft were to be numbered B-1490 to B-1495. The first F3 went to Martlesham Heath on the 9th of November 1917 for official trials, in the course of which it recorded performance figures that were considerably better than those of any other British aircraft then in existence. The official report was unusually enthusiastic. Very good indeed. The machine is considered a great advance on all existing fighting scouts. Not only has it an exceptionally good performance, but the visibility is very good indeed. The guns are well placed and easy to get at, and the maneuverability is excellent for a machine of this size and power. On the 28th of November 1917, the prototype F3 went to France, where on the 4th of December it was flown by Major W.J.C. Kennedy Cochran Patrick, DSO, MC. then Officer Commanding Number 60 Squadron, Royal Flying Corps, and SE-5A Unit. He recognized its fine performance, but felt that at heights below 12,000 feet, the aircraft was at some disadvantage owing to relative slowness in control response and the bad view forwards and downwards. His main criticism of the outlook from the cockpit was that the obstruction of forward and downward view was attributable to the width of the fuselage, but this report went on. On the other hand, I consider that above 12,000 feet, this machine would be very much better than any existing type, as it would not only have the advantage of speed and climb, but would also be able to outmaneuver the ordinary machine, owing to its ability to turn without losing height. X2 was back at Martlesham Heath by 8th December, but returned to Brooklands for modifications and was reported to be undergoing maker's trials late in January 1918. A decision to produce the Martinsyde F3 in quantity had been reached before the end of 1917, for on 6th December, Major General Trenchard, General Officer Commanding the Royal Flying Corps in France, wrote to the Director General of Military Aeronautics, "I understand 2 squadrons of this machine have been ordered, and I would be glad if you would inform me when they will come out. I think a 3rd gun ought to be put on the top plane to fire upwards. It need not fire straight forward. The machine only carries 300 rounds of ammunition per gun at present. This is really not enough, and even this amount of ammunition is only carried with great difficulty. This should be improved if possible." This produced a reply, dated 3rd January 1918, from Brigadier General Higgins, the Director of Aeronautical Equipment, that it was expected that 1 squadron of this machine will go out in April and the other in May. At the time when the first F3 was undergoing its initial trials at Brooklands, there was a serious shortage of Rolls-Royce aero engines of all kinds, and production fell seriously short of demands. The pressing need to keep the Royal Flying Corps' invaluable Bristol fighter squadrons fully operational implied an overriding claim on available Falcon engines that threatened the production plans for the Martinsyde F3. By the 14th of January 1918, the Martinsyde Company had decided to power the aircraft with either the 220 horsepower Lorraine-Dietrich 8BB engine or a Hispano-Suiza of unspecified output. The firm may have been given some advance information about the 300 horsepower direct-drive Hispano-Suiza 8B engine at that date, for the redesign to accommodate that particular engine was made in response to an official request. The first of these new engines did not complete its initial bench tests in France until the 3rd week of February 1918, however. Consequently, there is room for some doubt about its association with the Martinsyde design as early as January, and a 220 to 235 horsepower geared Hispano-Suiza may have been at first considered by the Martinsyde Design Office. Another major modification was proposed. At the Conference of Designers of Fighter Aircraft, held on or about 1st of January 1918, Major General Trenchard had emphasized the need for giving pilots a good downward view. Possibly this additional requirement arose from the extensive use of fighter aircraft on ground attack duties in 1917. To meet it, Martinsyde agreed to reduce the chord of the lower wings by 6 1/4 inches. They proposed that the modified aircraft with narrow chord lower wings and either the Lorraine-Dietrich or Hispano-Suiza engine should be designated F3A. It appears that by April 1918, all thought of using the Lorraine-Dietrich engine had been abandoned, and alternatives for the Martinsyde fighter were the Rolls-Royce Falcon and the Hispano-Suiza. On 16th April 1918, the company suggested that the Falcon-powered aircraft should be designated F3, and the Hispano-Suiza version the FA3. In the event, neither F3A nor FA3 was used. It seems that the new designation F4 was adopted by mutual agreement. In view of the date, the availability of the 300 horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine may have influenced the decision, for by the 24th of April, 10 of the new engines had been made. The structure of the center section had been revised to support a Lewis gun. thus meeting Trenchard's suggestion and the requirements of Specification A1A. Provision was made for the installation of oxygen cylinders in the lower center section, and the ammunition storage was enlarged to hold up to 400 rounds per gun. B-1490 arrived at Martlesham Heath on 26th of April 1918 for performance tests. These included mock combats with a camel and a Westland wagtail, in which the F3 proved itself convincingly superior to both. In turning ability and rolling control, the F3, surprisingly, equaled the camel, and so easily outclimbed both of its adversaries that it won comfortably. From Martlesham Heath, B-1490 went to Orfordness in mid-June 1918. Rigging diagrams and handbooks for the F3 were prepared. The final production form of the design was the F4 with a 300 horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine. In addition to reducing the chord of the lower wing, the Martinsyde Company moved the cockpit sufficiently far aft to give the pilot a clear view directly downwards, behind the trailing edge of the lower wing. On the F4, the shape of the fuselage deckings differed from that of the F3, and the plywood covering of the fuselage sides extended further aft. Large-scale production of the type was ordered. It is uncertain how many of the original batch of 150 aircraft ordered from Martinsyde Limited were built as F4s. A further contract for an additional 300 F4s was given to the parent firm. Other contractors were Bolton and Paul Limited, 500 aircraft, Hooper and Company, 200 aircraft, and the Standard Motor Company Limited, 300. Unfortunately, the modifications and uncertainties about engines retarded production, and the two squadrons promised to Trenchard for the spring of 1918 failed to materialize. Deliveries of the 300 horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine to Britain were belated, and various modifications in the design of the airframe were called for. Most of these were details only, but the increasing demands of aerial combat are reflected in requirements to increase the ammunition stowage to provide a total of 770 rounds per gun, and in the modifications to the fuel system and oil tank. In August, a revised fuel system had to be designed and installed owing to the introduction of the Imber self-sealing petrol tank, and the capacity of the oil tank was increased, starting on the 25th production aircraft, from 4 to 7.5 gallons. The early production F4s had twin Galley tube radiators, but on official insistence, these were replaced on later aircraft by single honeycomb radiator surfaces. F4s with the one-piece radiators also had a new system of radiator shutters, and were in 3 parts covering the entire radiator surface apart from the area immediately below the airscrew hub. An official proposal to replace the solid portions of the main spars by box spars was rejected by Martinsyde Limited, who refused flatly to make such spars for the F4. The official decision to name the Martinsyde F.4 Buzzard was taken in September 1918, and the firm were informed of this designation in a letter dated 9th of September. Production fell short of forecasts that had been made, largely owing to failures in deliveries of the 300 horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine. It had been expected that 25 Buzzards would have been delivered by the 2nd of November 1918, but in fact only 7 had been handed over, of which 3 had no engines. By that time over 50 airframes had been built, but 44 were in store, awaiting engines. This situation is difficult to understand, for deliveries of the 300 horsepower Hispano-Suizas began early in July 1918, and by the 2nd of November, 50 engines had been delivered. The official program of development up to 1st June 1919, that was drawn up about September 1918, had planned the arrival of the 1st Martinsyde F4 Squadron in France in November 1918, followed in December by Squadrons number 89 and 95, similarly equipped with Buzzards. Production delays compelled changes in these plans, and it was subsequently decided that number 95 Squadron, RAF, should be the first to have the Martinsyde F4. But its formation had been postponed, and the re-equipping of the 3 other squadrons with the Buzzard had been cancelled. 4 SE-5A squadrons would have been re-equipped with Buzzards, 2 in January 1919 and 2 in February. A new Buzzard squadron would have gone to France in March, followed by another in April, and Buzzards would have replaced Dolphins in 2 squadrons in April and 2 more in May. Thus, by the end of May, there would have been no fewer than 13 Buzzard squadrons on the Western Front, had the war continued until then. But hostilities ceased before any unit could be equipped with the superb new fighter. After the armistice, production continued for a time at the Martinsyde Works, and over 370 Buzzard airframes were built, but seems that no other contractor had produced any complete Buzzards. The F4 D-4256 had gone to France on the 17th of July, 1918, and was flown at Villacoublay during that month. Its performance was highly regarded, and it was considered for service with the Escadrille de Chasse of the French Aviation Militaire. D-4256 returned to Martlesham Heath on 6th August and went back to the Martinsyde Works on the 15th. The design had attracted American attention at an early stage. The F3 was considered suitable for the 8-cylinder, 225-horsepower Liberty 8 engine, and a contract for 1,500 F3s to be powered by that engine was placed, possibly with the Curtiss Company. This contract was canceled before the spring of 1918, doubtless because the American authorities had decided to develop the 12-cylinder Liberty 12, in preference to the Liberty 8, which was found to suffer from severe vibration. Production of the Liberty 8 was halted when only 15 of the 8,000 engines ordered had been delivered. American interest revived in 1918 with the appearance of the Martinsyde F4, and production in the USA of the later type with the Wright-built 300-horsepower Hispano-Suiza was planned. An F4 airframe was officially requested by the United States authorities, but the armistice supervened before American production of the aircraft could be initiated. Before the war ended, a development of the Martinsyde F4 Buzzard was put in hand. On 21st October 1918, the Assistant Controller of the Technical Department issued an official request that 3 aircraft be allotted for conversion into a long-range version of the basic design. This variant was to be designated Martinsyde F4A, Buzzard Mark 1A. The intention was that the Buzzard 1A should replace the Sopwith Snipe 1A as the standard escort fighter of the independent force Royal Air Force. Externally, the Buzzard 1A looked very much like the standard Buzzard 1, but had a wind-driven petrol punt on the front leg of the starboard undercarriage V-strut. Additionally, H-6540 had a Lewis gun let into the upper surface of each lower wing, making it a 4-gun fighter. These wing-mounted guns could not, of course, be reloaded in flight. The particular Buzzard 1A was at the Isle of Grain between July and August 1920 and was still undergoing tests at that late date. The appropriateness of replacing Snipes with Buzzards was emphasized by an official comparison of modern fighting scouts that formed the subject of the official report F235 dated 15th October 1918. The aircraft compared were the Martinsyde F3 Falcon, Sopwith Snipe BR2, the BAT Bantam Wasp, and the Fokker D7. On all major counts, the Martinsyde F3 was greatly superior to all the others. The Snipe showed up very poorly, and was by far the worst of the 3 British types. For these tests, B-1490 was back at Martlesham Heath by the 5th of October 1918, and stayed there until the war ended. There can be no doubt that had the Buzzard entered operational service during the war, it would have proved to be a potent weapon. It was possibly the finest single-seat fighter in existence at the end of hostilities. Testing of the standard Buzzard 1 continued throughout 1919. As the Hispano-Suiza engine was so slow to become available in quantities, it is not wholly surprising that some Martinsyde F4s were fitted with the Rolls-Royce Falcon engine. Of these, D-43 F.4 was one of the F4s that were allocated to the Royal Air Force Communication Wing for service between London and Paris during the 1919 Peace Conference. Although a Buzzard participated in the first Royal Air Force aerial pageant in 1920, the type was never adopted as a standard type in the Royal Air Force, and no squadron was equipped with it. A single F4 was taken to Japan in 1921 as a sample British military aircraft by the British Aviation Mission to the Imperial Japanese Navy, but no Japanese orders followed. After the war, the Martinsyde Company retained a number of F4 airframes and produced several military derivatives, both single-seat and two-seat, a seaplane version of the F4, and some sporting variants. None of these enjoyed any success, and the Martinsyde Company finally went out of business in February 1924. Numbers of surplus F4s were sold abroad by the Aircraft Disposal Company. These went to Finland, Latvia, Portugal, Spain, and the Irish Free State in varying quantities. But the largest foreign user of the F4 was Russia, which acquired about 100 in 1922 and 23. Several Russian squadrons were equipped with Martinsyde F4s, which remained in service until 1927. Russia also acquired 20 of the enlarged two-seat variant with two-bay wings that appeared in 1921. The Russian two-seaters were reported to have X-form interplane struts. 6 of the Spanish F4s were still in service with the Spanish Naval Air Service when the Civil War started in 1936. And the last operational specimen was the Finnish MA-31, which was still in use on skis during the winter of 1940 and 41. This may well be the F4 that survives, sadly neglected at Vesivama, the only surviving Martinsyde aircraft of any kind in the world. The Aircraft Disposal Company produced some F4 developments. They fitted some aircraft with Lamblin lobster pot radiators as an alternative to the flat single radiator. Towards the end of 1924, the ADC created the Martinsyde ADC-1, a variant in which the 380 horsepower Armstrong-Siddeley Jaguar radial engine replaced the Hispano-Suiza. And finally, in 1926, there appeared 2 examples of the Nimbus Martinsyde, which had the 300 horsepower ADC Nimbus engine and a speed in excess of 150 miles per hour.